Welcome to the Urban Complex, a system of interrelated emotion-charged ideas, feelings, memories, and impulses. This name takes us and lays out what a listener should expect, a podcast where ideas, feelings, and memories collide, leading towards meaningful change. All opinions by Chris Richardson, Dominic Papa, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Arizona State University or the Arizona Commerce Authority. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for decisions. Any endorsement or messages from sponsors are solely supporting the production of this podcast. There are no relationships further than the podcast purposes with any sponsor unless separately created with another entity. Enjoy the Urban Complex. Smarter cities for a stronger tomorrow.
Here we are again, Dom. This is Chris.
Yeah, here we go. You ready?
The Urban Complex. About ready to do another episode here. That in a second. What's going on there, though? I feel like you're showing the guns today.
It's here in Arizona in winter. It's a brisk 75 degrees here, so I'm going to enjoy the short sleeve weather as long as I can possibly take it. But yeah, I appreciate you noticing the hard work I've been putting in.
And let's not intimidate our guest. He's an amazing guy, so just tone it down a little bit. All right. All right. No, this is the Urban Complex. We have an amazing guest today. His name's Suresh Shenoy. He's done so much. Hopefully he gives us kind of a deep background. I mean, he's been in tech at some amazing companies and just really blows us away. And then recently he's the president of a global foundation called Wheels Global, doing amazing things tied to 5 different complex problems. Primarily the work is done in partnership with regions across the country of India. And it's funny, neither Dom nor I knew Suresh, but a friend of mine who I'd met through Arizona State University, his name's Rajiv Shenoy, his son. I was telling him about this podcast, and he was just, you got to meet my dad. He would be a perfect guest, and as we've done some research, he is. So we'll get him on the podcast in just a second, and hopefully you'll love it. All right, Suresh. Welcome. Please let Dom and I give you a warm welcome to our podcast, The Urban Complex.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, we're super excited for this. So I think the best way to start is that, we don't really know you that well. Obviously, we've had quick conversation. Do know your son, Rajiv, and thankful for him to make the introduction because your story is so great. But tell us a little bit. Why don't you start kind of taking us from your past and how you got to this point? Like we'll get to Wheels Global Foundation soon. But just tell us about you and how how your career led you to where you are today.
Sure. Thank you. I graduated from the Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay, India, which is now Mumbai, in 1972. I worked in India for a year for a castings company, a metal castings company for a year, and then decided that I had to come and do my master's in business here. So I came to the US in 1973. I went to University of Connecticut in Stars. And then after graduation from there in 1974, December, I started working for a startup called Maridine International in Boston. And it was a joint venture with Marubeni of Japan, which was at that time the 3rd or 4th largest Sogo Shosha, the Japanese trading company, as they call it. And we were a bunch of engineers from the IITs and a couple from MIT and Harvard Business School, actually, which was a small company. And the idea was to help sell US technology and products worldwide, because US did not have much of an exports program at the time. So we were one of the early companies to focus on technology-based product, marketing overseas. And Marubeni was at that time a $80 billion company. And today, I think it's closer to $150 billion in revenue. And a typical Japanese trading company, they had offices just about everywhere in the world.
Did you say 18 million to 150 billion?
No, they were 80 billion.
80, wow.
80.
Incredible.
But these Japanese trading companies like Marubeni and Mitsubishi, and they work on very, very thin margins if you know the Japanese trading system. So they have very large volumes of business, but they're mostly commodity oriented, but not they were not.
Yeah, I worked for a startup that had investment from Mitsui, so I know a little bit about that. But that's just phenomenal growth. I think that's amazing.
But that was a time when the oil crisis, in the Middle East, spurred all the construction activity throughout the Middle East, and there was a lot of building going on there. And our company was actually supplying a lot of equipment for hospitals and for hotels, which were engineered and designed here in the U.S. So we did that for about 11 years or so. And in 1988, we sold the business to a large conglomerate called National Intergroup. That was a time when the U.S. started to sort of emulate the Japanese, approach. And National Intergroup was a large conglomerate that owned parts of Kmart and Ben Franklin chain of stores. And they bought about 26 other companies like us to create a fairly large organization. I worked with them for a couple of years, and then I decided to venture out on my own. And I started my own castings foundry in Massachusetts. And learned a lot about doing business in the United States at that time. In fact, one of my favorite stories is that we could not find labor because I was competing against the high-tech firms there like Wang Labs and Digital Equipment. So I made a deal with the Walpole prison system to hire a few murderers who were there for life. And I used to check them out in the morning on my personal guarantees, etc.
We're lucky you're here today then, sounds like.
Yes, but that was quite an experience. And I like to say that, I had a couple of murderers on my payroll, but I say that in kind of jest because I learned about a
segment like the rest of the Fortune 500.
But I learned about the life of people in a certain segment of society in America that most people don't experience, I think, and happily so. But it's a very interesting kind of a dynamic. But when it comes to dirty industrial work like foundries, you can't find labor. Even in 1988, we could not find labor. It was very difficult. But anyway, to cut a very long story short, there were a couple of, Dukakis was running for president, and he passed the Universal Healthcare Bill and also a Clean Air Act, which immediately made my foundry not profitable. So I was considering moving to actually Arizona and New Mexico, which was a little bit more conducive to business at that time. They were inviting companies to relocate. But my brother came up.
We still are, by the way, if you're looking.
That's good to know. Meanwhile, my brother, older brother, who's also from IIT, had started a software company in Washington, D.C. And as a hobby, I was one of the very active members of the Boston Computer Society because personal computers were very new. And, I was very well versed in some of the operating systems and, spreadsheet programs, which are all being written in Boston at the time, Lotus and SuperCalc and VisiCalc and all that. So he convinced me to sell my foundry and join him, here in Washington, D.C. in the software business. So that brought me to Washington in 1990. And my brother and I joined him in 1989. And we've been partners since then till we sold the business in 2015. And we grew very nicely, to about 400 people or so. We did mostly federal government work. And in a very niche market with document management systems and so on, what we called managing unstructured information. So we did a lot of work, very pioneering work with automated workflow and things like that. But anyway, 2015, we sold the business and I decided to retire in 2020. And I had to put in some more time there and was wondering what I should do. But I was very active in our Pan IIT Alumni Association in North America. And interestingly, we have over 50,000 graduates here in the US from the IIT system. And most of them, or many of them, are in entrepreneurial roles, if you will. You find them in Silicon Valley a lot. And a lot of them have pioneered technologies around cellular communications, IT networking, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure you read about them. 60 Minutes did a segment on the IITs and how competitive it is and how IIT alumni have fared well in the United States thanks to the fantastic
Yeah.
opportunity.
Well, I definitely know it. Working for Honeywell, we hired a ton of people in India. I'm not sure our guests will know, but when you said you're from IIT, it's definitely an honor.
Oh, thank you. And it's a different story, but we at that time in the 1990s and even early 2000, not too many people knew about India as a fairly rich resource or human capital, if you will. And we started something called the Pan IIT organization, which, because there are now, at that time there were only 5-6 IITs. Now there are 23 in India. And because of the competitive nature, they produce, world-class engineers, if you will. And we decided that we needed a Pan IIT conference to talk about best practices, both here in the United States and India. And during one of those conferences, our then president of India, Abdul Kalam, was a nuclear scientist. He said, you guys meet and you talk a lot, but you don't do anything. So why don't you try to solve the big problems? So we said, okay, so
sounds
what are
like typical IT, talk a lot, not do anything. No, just kidding. I don't want to burn my profession.
So we got together as a group, and some of these names may be recognizable. There was Pradeep Khosla, who is now the chancellor of UC San Diego, Rajat Gupta, who was the chairman at the managing partner of McKinsey and Company, and several other people. Sam Pitroda, who actually lives in Chicago and is considered to be the father of cellular communications in India. And several other people. We got together here in Washington, D.C., actually in our office, and we tried to sort of brainstorm what are the big problems. And we figured that the problems that face not only India, but perhaps the United States and much of the world are surrounding clean, potable water, access to water, affordable healthcare, energy, renewable energy, education, rural livelihoods, and finally doing it all in a sustainable manner. Interestingly, that was in 2005, 2006. And as you know, in 2017, the United Nations adopted what are called the Sustainable Development Goals. And they adopted 17 areas, for sustainable development. And all 6 that we have identified are part of those 17 goals, if you will. So we are very much aligned with what we now believe is a universal or global, globally accepted areas for focus.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're definitely well aligned. But before we jump to now with Wheels Global and how you're exploring those topics, I'm curious, let's go back to 2001. A little research told me that you might have been the chairman of the Red Cross in New York City during during 9/11. And I think any of our listeners, if they were to think now what they're dealing with COVID, I bet you there's some things you could share about how you handled that situation that might be relevant to today.
Well, a slight correction. It wasn't in 2001. I was chairman of the Red Cross in the National Capital Region here in Washington, D.C. Sorry, in 2007, 2008. And I remember that very well because President Obama had just been elected as president when I was chairman of the Red Cross. And I thought that it was very important for me and for everybody who's like me in the United States, an immigrant, who has had the opportunity to do our thing and fare well for ourselves, that we need to give back to our community that we have adopted. And there was no better way to do it than join the Red Cross. So which is what motivated me to start volunteering my time. And I was on the board of the Chamber of Commerce at that time. And I was approached to see if I would join the board at the Red Cross, which I did, and then got elected as chairman. And I served as chairman for 3 or 4 years. And I learned a lot, an awful lot, because during our time, we had the tsunami, we had the hurricane in New Orleans, Katrina, we had the earthquake in Haiti, and of course we had Obama's president. I bring that up because there were about 2 million people who were gathering for the
Obama as president, was that equally as disruptive as those things? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it could have been. It
No,
could have
I'm
been.
just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Well, because, at that time, with the 2 million people getting together for the inaugural ceremony, as I'm sure there will be during Biden's swearing in, there were 5 credible threats of a terrorist attack on Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Okay. When I say 5 credible threats, that means it had been vetted by the security agencies and so on. And it could have been fairly calamitous, if you will, should that happen. And by congressional edicts, if you will, the Red Cross are supposed to be the first responders of choice. So we had to prepare ourselves in a manner that it wasn't disruptive to the swearing in ceremony, and at the same time be cognizant of these threats and be prepared, in the event of a dirty bomb or something like that, how we evacuate 2 million people from Washington, from Pennsylvania Avenue, if you will. That's a big task. And the amount of preparation it takes is enormous. And it had to be done in a manner where it doesn't spread any unnecessary, fear amongst the people. And things are done in an orderly way. The ambulances had to be stationed properly within easy reach. Evacuation routes had to be identified, security had to be provided, and so on. So it's a huge mammoth task. And I'm not saying that the Red Cross did it alone. There were a lot of other agencies like FEMA and others who were involved in that planning, as I'm sure they are today, to prepare for January 20th, if you will. But this kind of opportunity is something that I would recommend to anybody, because you learn so much. You learn what other people do, to keep us safe, and makes you that much more appreciative of the community and the society in which we live. So
completely, yeah, Suresh, I think you hit on the nail of the goal behind this podcast, is to help people learn from the stories of others, right? Because as you mentioned, all the complexities that were involved in that Red Cross effort, smart cities by themselves are a massive complexity that our listeners, from city managers to CIOs to even public, everyday public servants, as such as yourself, they struggle to grapple, with these challenges. And so I like to kind of go back to the Wheels Foundation for a little bit, because it really does touch on the subject of smart cities and the work you're doing with India. And maybe to preface the conversation a bit, it reminds me of a quote that Chris and I heard from a wise man once that said, one of the biggest challenges in life is being content with what you have without losing your ambition. And I think this ties nicely to the story of, a successful guy like yourself now giving back at scale for your birth country, India. Chris, do you remember who said that quote?
I don't know. Let's ask Suresh. Maybe he'll know.
Suresh.
Well, yes, I can see where that came from Rajiv. Yes.
Well, for our listeners that don't know, that was Suresh's quote. So, I think it's a perfect segue into the work that you're doing with the Wheels Foundation. And I'm so interested in this because, my colleague, Brian Dean, and I here in the greater Phoenix region actually spun up our own smart city nonprofit because we found it easier to really push innovation and technology from the outside in. And so, but we're by far not doing it at quite the scale that you're doing it in India. So please tell us the story behind it.
Yeah.
And really double click into some of these areas, that you mentioned: water, rural development, and so on. So please let our listeners know that story.
Well, first coming to the quote that Rajiv shared with you, he's right. One of the things that you have a tendency to fall into is this groove where, you're always chasing something that is just right around the corner, but not quite within your reach yet. So people fall into that rut. Okay. So you're constant. So, when we first came here, I had an old beat up Volkswagen Beetle. Okay. It literally died a natural death after 230,000 miles in the middle of Wellesley, Massachusetts. And I always thought of buying another car, and I did, and I bought a secondhand used Toyota, which I was very happy with. And as life progressed, I started buying more, luxury cars, and and I was saying that, where do you stop? How far do you push this envelope? It's really, you've got to be satisfied at some point And what Rajiv said, what is actually a quote from my mom, who used to tell me that, look, you got to be ambitious. You got to be ambitious to achieve things in life, but you should be doing it in a fashion where you learn how to be content with whatever you have. And it's very difficult to be content with what you have and not lose your ambition, because you're always striving for something more, something bigger, something better, and better for yourself, for your children, and all that. And that has led to me more thinking on that. And in fact, I'm surprised that Rajiv didn't bring that up with you. And he asked me, so as you get older, what are your challenges? Because you don't have anything per se to achieve. You brought up your children, you've given them the best start you can. And this thought came to me at an association event where they were giving me some kind of a recognition, and somebody whispered in my ears and they said, why you're getting this recognition? I said, no, it just says that you're too old to do anything else, so you're being sent to pasture. So I thought about it, and they asked me to say a few words, and the word that sprung to my mind was relevance. And the challenge that we all have, I think, is how to stay relevant at each stage in our life to the rest of our community, our society, and even to our own family. Because as you grow older, that challenge of staying relevant, becomes, it's a totally different dimension. Okay, so right now, at my age, I just turned 70, I see that, there's a lot that I could probably contribute. I still teach, classes here occasionally at George Mason University. I do it pro bono for the most part. And I teach a subject on what we call bringing ideas to market. It's actually called From Geeks to Gazillionaires. So not that I'm a geek nor a gazillionaire, but it makes sense for having a topic called Geeks to Gazillionaires. And and people come to you and ask you about your life's learnings, like I mentioned in the foundry business, hiring people from the prison system. I've had similar experiences in the software industry and so on. But as you get older, you start saying, how do I stay relevant? Okay. And Wheels has provided me that platform, to stay relevant, because what I thought is, based on the Red Cross experience, is that there are different types of philanthropists. There are what I call givers. There are people who write a check, okay, and there are takers. There are people who take the check. Okay, universities are a good example. They take the money for research or whatever it is, and there are lots of NGOs that take money from the givers. Then there are doers. There are people who actually roll up their sleeves and go and do something in the trenches. Okay. And then there are enablers. And I think that if you look at people like, I would say us, I don't know you that well either, so I'll just say us in a broad sense, that people who have had the luxury of having a good education, a good job, being connected in society through your vocation, whether it is through business or teaching or whatever. And we have created networks. And these networks are extremely important and extremely useful. So for example, by participating in this podcast with you, I'm getting to know you. So tomorrow, if there is a problem related to a campus activity, I can pick up the phone and speak to you and see, have you faced this? That network is extremely useful when it comes to philanthropy. So, in India, they in Hindi.
And we hope you do, by the way.
I'm sorry?
Pick up the phone. That's why we're starting it too. I love this topic. It's part of what our goal is too. So thank you.
So, in India, they say, tan man dhan. That is, when it comes to philanthropy, loosely translated, it translates to time, talent, and treasure. Okay. So philanthropy is not just about treasure. It's not just about money, but it's almost 66%, 2/3 of that has to do with your time and your talent. Okay. So there's a lot that you can do with time and talent that you probably cannot even do with money. Okay. So I thought that with all this talent, with the IIT alumni here who are like me, who came here in the 70s, who are now retired, and they're saying, what do I do? I still feel young. What can I do? So give your time and talent. I'm not.
I think he's saying we're broke, Dom.
Well, you're not, because you have a lot of time and talent, and I sure hope you have a lot of treasure as well. So. But I'm finding that our ability. So when someone comes to us and says there is a problem, we want to solve it. Okay, I'll give you one example of that. During a recent visit to India, we found that there is a man-made lake that has been built just south of Bombay, a very large man-made lake for drinking water and so on. And as a result, it was draining all these streams that were feeding into it. Okay. So the farmers along that stream were going hungry because they couldn't have water. And by law, they were not allowed to tap into that water or dam the streams. So the land was going arid and they were wondering what they can do. And in one of those sessions, we learned that, gee, you can grow bamboo out here. Okay. That doesn't need a lot of water. So they started a bamboo cultivation project along those areas of land. And today they're a very large bamboo producing, community. And then the question is, what do you do with all that bamboo? Okay. So there are a lot of industries that use bamboo, matter of fact. And now we are trying to sort of seed some entrepreneurial ventures to convert that bamboo into paper and all that other kind of stuff that, that derivative stuff. So there's a classic example of simple science and mathematics and engineering allows to solve a problem that is very germane to the people in that area. Okay, so I think that comes from network. It didn't come with money. Somebody else came and said, "Gee, I love that idea, and I'm willing to underwrite the whole project." Okay, so the treasure came from somewhere else. So I think that we can solve problems for water and healthcare and others.
Well, yeah, you're now consulting through Wheels Global to the president of India, solving some of these at scale. Why don't you pick, two of these stories or so that just, you shared a little bit. Like, these are massive things you're trying to solve, and you're making amazing progress. Tell our listeners kind of what smart cities means to you and how Wheels Global is taking that forward.
Sure. So as I said, we started looking at these in some sort of silos of water and healthcare and so on and so forth. And we did about 10 or 12 projects with clean water technologies using reverse osmosis. We came up with a package that costs about $3,500. You go and put it in a village and you take all the groundwater and run it through the reverse osmosis project, system, and you get clean drinking water. We did similar healthcare projects, giving some local volunteers basic telemedicine equipment. But after about 4 or 5 years, these projects were dead, where they were put up. And the reason is we realized that there was no economic interest for local people to support and sustain that. So we felt very strongly that going forward, we need to do things where there is always an entrepreneurial venture that is at the center of this, that somebody is willing to own it and run it and operate it and make some money while doing it. So even though it's a social impact kind of a project, that there is a for-profit kind of an incentive built into it so locals can adopt it. The second thing we found is that you really cannot have good health without clean water. You cannot have clean water without proper sanitation. You cannot have good sanitation and other technology implemented without energy and so on. So they are in fact interrelated. And interestingly, livelihoods have to be a part of it. So Wheels kind of came together, and coincidentally, we found that Stanford has a similar project called Ideal Village, and they do similar things. And we've been in communications with them, trying to sort of figure out how we can codify these lessons learned and design engineering programs to solve these problems very specifically. And I can give you a few examples of that. So, one example is there was a project that we were asked to conduct a research on mother and child nutrition in India, and what we found is that even the basic process of breastfeeding was not very well understood by the local women, and they did not really know how to do it properly. Okay. So we created a series of videos called the first 1,000 days in the life of a child. Okay, that's from conception through say 3 years of age, and the importance of nutrition. And that video was then translated through another program that we call spoken tutorials, because in India we speak 300 languages and there are 26 official languages. So spoken tutorials is a program that was launched by IIT Bombay Professor Kannan Mudgalaya, who is also on our board of directors, where he takes any education material. It could be your PowerPoint presentations or any material like this podcast, and he could convert it into 22, 26 languages that are relevant to India, including Hindi, Marathi, Telugu, Tamil, and so on and so forth. And then he even included Spanish and French, if you want. Okay? So then all these videos were converted to those 22 languages. And then we worked with another not-for-profit organization called Ekal Vidyalaya, which is very large in India, very well known. And they have over 100,000 villages under their belt, where they have volunteers working, teaching children in primary school and so on. And we distributed these videos to those 79,000 villages in their local language. So there's a classic example where for very little money, we took some important, information regarding nutrition and child and mother care, converted it into local languages, and electronically distributed it in no time. So good example of how the integrated projects work.
So, 100%. And you mentioned Stanford and working with them earlier in the podcast. You mentioned MIT. Gets me my little competitive juices flowing. I don't know if you know, but my employer is Arizona State University. We've been ranked #1 in innovation 6 years in a row, ahead of those schools. So if you really want to scale, feel free.
We would love to work with you. We would love to work with you. Absolutely. In fact, thank you very much. I'm going to take you up on that.
We would love to.
Chris just got this there. Suresh, I love these stories because our listeners are going to hear this a lot, but when it comes to smart cities, I really think collaboration is the key. In the stories that you just painted, it really shows how you've been able to catalyze the ecosystem in India to solve some of these incredibly, unprecedented challenges. And so, a lot of our audience is going to be, US based city managers, CEOs, as I mentioned. And, I do a lot of work with them. And the one thing that I've realized that they've struggled with is this idea of, really catalyzing the ecosystems in their local communities, right? For instance, here in Arizona, it's difficult for a city manager to access the time and talent of the people in the university because ASU is absolutely massive, right? The #1 largest public research institution in the country. So where do they even start, to try to engage the innovation that's going on campus? Or in your terms, the philanthropic community, city leaders sometimes don't really quite understand how to bridge that gap between the goals and outcomes that the philanthropic organizations are trying to solve and the challenges that the cities are trying to solve. So if I can ask you to maybe put your city manager hat on, take the perspective of a city manager, what's some advice, some tips you might give them in order to help them really catalyze the ecosystems in their local communities? How do they approach a philanthropic organization, a nonprofit like Wheels Global Foundation? How do they approach a university? What's the goal of getting these people around the same tables to work together?
So, it's interesting you should say that because, one of the lessons that we've learned, having lived here in the US now for over 45 years, is that this country, the ecosystem is a very fine balance between government, academia, industry, and the community. Okay. I have seen and experienced how NIH, for example, works with academia to do fundamental research. Okay. Or the whole space program, how MIT and, Lawrence Livermore Labs and, UCLA and others, and maybe even Arizona, State University and so on, have been involved in federal research and development projects, okay? And how those products that have come out of that, the technologies that have come out of that, have given way to a lot of consumer products like, Velcro and, even, vaccines and so on and so forth. What hasn't happened as much, I believe, is that the local cities and towns and communities in which these universities exist found a way to participate, with the university system. And in fact, I have raised that as a potential to build a curriculum around that. So for example, if I can talk about in my own community because I know the names and the counties that we are in. So George Mason University, which is a state university, is in Fairfax County. Okay, and they also have campuses around other surrounding areas, and a large percentage of their students for the longest time were commuters. Okay, and now they have changed in character, and it's changed a little bit. So there is more on-campus activity and so on and so forth. But it gives a phenomenal opportunity for, say, Fairfax County to say, hey, we are having XYZ problem, and let's work with George Mason University to see how we can. And now what we do is we start a program in innovation, as an example. Okay, and we get the College of Engineering, okay, the engineering school, we get the business school, we get whoever else, okay, urban planning or whatever together, get some students who are funded to partially and incented by the state or the local government to find solutions to the problem. So what that does, it allows students to gather and put together, first of all, a problem definition. What is the problem? Okay, it might be an aging infrastructure, it might be changing demographics, it might be changing priorities, maybe the tax system, the way it's organized, whatever the problems are. But the students are participating with city managers to, first of all, let's define the problem. Okay? And once you define the problem, then you have more brainstorming sessions with other students, okay, in engineering or whatever, or political science or whatever, and say, okay, what kind of solutions can we bring to the table for consideration? And let's give a choice of 5 or 10 solutions that we come up with, okay? And some of it might be technology oriented, some of it might be policy oriented, okay? Going back to my story about the castings and the foundry that I had in Medfield, Massachusetts, okay? If you're familiar with the casting process, we use certain kind of what are called core materials, okay? And when the castings are done, you have to wash that off with using some kind of muriatic acid. Now, there was no easy facility to throw that acid out somewhere. So one of the companies in our neighborhood actually used to put it in their drain, in the sink, okay? And pretty soon the city pipes started to corrode, and nobody knew why it was corroding that badly. And it was because these people were just throwing it in the sink.
Did these people move to Detroit too?
Probably. No, but you see what I'm trying to say is that you don't know where the problem is. And what the city manager might think of as a corrosion problem is a waste management problem somewhere else, okay? But when you get the university to come in and do a study, and the students are given the opportunity to think through these issues, you get better students, you get better solutions, and the city managers find a way to engage the local. So I don't know how much, activity you have with your surrounding community, but if every college did that, okay, the students learn a lot, and it can be funded through philanthropic activities. So a local industry might support it, okay? Others might just donate towards that, because you want the children not only to get a theoretical education, but if they are able to practice it, okay, where they can learn from IBM on how do you instrument a pipe, an infrastructure to measure, how the corrosion is happening and for over what period of time. People like IBM might be interested in participating in that. So you get
funny you say that. Your friend Teresa Carlson at Amazon Web Services, you sound like you could be an AWS employee. We literally partnered with AWS. We created the first ever, what we call the ASU Smart City Cloud Innovation Center. It's powered by Amazon Web Services. We do exactly that. We bring the municipalities with a broad array. It's not just their IT people. We bring in whatever represents, to your point, the problem. We bring them in. We work backwards to find out exactly the problem. Not necessarily. Sometimes they come up with just a weird idea what the problem is, and it's from a very insular view. You said earlier how your projects didn't work because they didn't reach the local citizen, right? And so, we put that at the center. You can get information about it at smartchallenges.asu.edu. This is great. Tell me, as before we kind of be respectful of Suresh's time, like anything else we can glean from of how to help city managers, CIOs really kind of understand how to take these ideas deeply and learn from you?
Yeah, you know what I'm really interested about, and this is what blows my mind is, they say like 90% of city problems are common across all cities, whether you're in, America or India. And what I'm really struggling to find out how is, how do we start to share these best practices? So if you're developing, the water technology in India, it might not exactly fit the exact problem that we have here in Arizona, but we do have water issues. And so how can we take the innovative solutions that one area or one city in the world is solving and then port those solutions to thereby rapidly accelerate the development and deployment of these solutions that can help solve urban challenges and really help improve the quality of life. And so how do we get city managers, CIOs, even university leaders to come together and exchange best practices, exchange ideas, and exchange technology, right? Because if these technologies are solving problems, we want to, implement them to help solve those problems, improve the quality of life. So Suresh, I don't know if you've started to think about taking the lessons learned that the projects you're doing in India, and how, are you thinking about bringing them to the United States, or where can we go from here?
Well, we have tried that. So for example, I talked about spoken tutorials. Okay, we demonstrated how spoken tutorials can be used. We showed it in Dallas. We've shown it here in Montgomery College. We have taken it to a couple of other community colleges because they are always struggling with teaching immigrants English as a second language, for example. Okay, and these kinds of technologies can help. And they have expressed interest, but they haven't adopted it as yet. Okay, so there's one way in which some things that are happening in India can come here. But we also have to look at the regulatory framework as well. So, for example, right now we are implementing a couple of hundred telemedicine offices in India. Okay, because if there is one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that even among 700 million people who live in villages in India, they don't have any healthcare. Okay, they don't have access, and not only that, a lot of villagers prefer to have Ayurvedic or local homeopathic, medications rather than the Western medications, which are hard to get and expensive. So telemedicine is sort of something that we are looking at and implementing in many places. We have done so far about 10 or 12 as a pilot, and we are now scaling it up to 35 or 36 before the middle of next year. And then we've got a pipeline of 100 different projects in the same vein, if you will. And each one costs as little as only $700, okay, just to buy the laptop and the software and so on. And it's all in the cloud. It's all in the cloud, okay? So is it practical to sort of do that in the US? We don't know, okay? So interestingly, a couple of children of people who are active with wheels, who are in medical school in New York, are talking to us about doing that on university campuses, for example. Okay, in fact, there is one of our colleagues who has developed something called a health radar. Okay, so as IT folks, you might be interested to know if there are certain types of symptoms for health arising from certain corners of the campus. Okay, so if you have a kind of a visualizing data that is being collected, students not showing up for class or students going for medical help or whatever, and you can see if there is another campus-wide illness that is spreading across, or you can start to look at where the potential problems are. Okay, so they call it the health radar. Now, that has already been done in India. Okay, the IITs are doing it. So there's some thought and knowledge that can be brought back out here. Okay, I was just reading something really interesting yesterday. There's a group of students in Hyderabad in India who have developed a T-shirt which can display all sorts of information. You can say whether you are happy or depressed, whether you are going to class, whatever information, and you can program it and you just press a button and it's like a walking billboard. It's kind of interesting. Depression and student suicides are on the rise at IIT campuses. Okay, so people are not able to understand why that is happening. It might be because of societal pressures. But if a person is able to, in a kind of a fun, informal way, display, oh, yeah, I'm really happy today, or I'm really depressed, he's asking for help. I mean, that sounds kind of, like, gee, why would you want to be a walking billboard? But on campus, it might be really used for certain purposes. If you ask Rajiv,
it sounds like an influencer today. I mean, the Kardashians do it, so.
That's right. No, but I mean, these are all simple applications of technology that can solve some real problems if you put your mind to it and say, how can it be used? And one way to exchange this is, to have this kind of a dialogue. I'm so happy that and so feel so privileged that you invited me, because I would not have had this opportunity to talk to you unless, Rajiv made this introduction, if you will. Okay, that's why the network effect is so important. And we host bi-monthly webinars where we get a fairly large population of people who are in philanthropy and not-for-profit organizations, even government officials who listen to these kind of subjects. And they say, okay, how can we help? So just so you know, just yesterday, the Ministry of Rural Development has officially signed a memorandum of understanding with Wheels as their technology partners. So anything to do with rural development in India, we hope we'll have a line into the ministry and say, look, this is what we're trying to do, okay? And this is where we need government help. And more so in India than in the United States, public-private partnerships are the way to go, okay? So going back to your question, even in the United States, if you think about it like a public-private partnership to solve a problem, then it becomes imperative for the city authorities, city managers to work with the private institutions or public institutions and the public to come up with joint solutions, because there might be policy frameworks that need to be looked at, there might be technologies to be looked at, labor issues to be looked at, and so on and so forth. So that's how we would do it, more communication.
Yeah, that's incredible. And first of all, congrats on the success in partnering with the ministry. That's just incredible news and tremendously exciting news. And all those stories are just so inspiring. And I think personally, I like to say, we in Arizona have a lot of rural communities and a lot of tribal communities here that struggle with a lot of the issues that you mentioned. And we would love to chat with you about telehealth, telemedicine. We have a big focus on broadband connectivity to these areas as well. So I think there's a lot of things that we can chat about, roll up our sleeves, and kind of do here in Arizona. So
we'd love to do it. We have a very active, alumni group, throughout the country. I'm sure in Arizona as well. I'm sure in Phoenix and elsewhere. And if there are challenges, we would love to learn about it and see how we can participate. We've done some things here in the US, but not quite to the same scale and extent as in India, because there are a lot of NGOs who do things here as well. We worked briefly with an organization called Everybody Wins DC, where we volunteered time and gave some money, to essentially go and read books to these kids in 5th and 6th grade. And I went and spent a couple of lunch hours, doing that. And I was absolutely shocked by the demographics of that school in inner city DC. 95% of the students came from foster homes, 95%. And at least one parent was either incarcerated or a drug addict or died of AIDS or some other stuff. So it is mind-boggling. And these kids are very smart, very bright. Given the chance, I'm sure that they would excel at whatever they do. But you wouldn't think that this is happening right in our backyard. In fact, right behind the US Capitol. Okay, so I know that there are issues and challenges here, and I think we can all, if we put our heads together, we can find ways to solve those problems, and that's the only way to do it.
100%. We have a couple questions we ask kind of our guests that are standard. Curious to see if there's anyone that's been, with such a broad network, I'm sure there's many, but is there one that stands out that you'd like to publicly say thanks for appreciation to kind of help you in your own journey and or what Wheels is doing?
Well, first and foremost, I got to tell you that no man is an island, as they say. It's not one person who can solve these problems. So I truly stand tall on the shoulders of a lot of people who contribute their time and energy and, There are people starting with our chairman, Rajat Gupta, my colleague Hiten Ghosh, who's now in his 80s, who's a 1958 graduate of IIT Kharagpur, who's lived here for a long time. If you saw him and talked to him, his energy is incredible. Gulab Bhavna. There are lots of people. I can go on naming them. There are hundreds of them, who are members of the Pan IIT, Alumni Association, who, despite their own, pressures of family and startups or jobs or whatever, they never hesitate to step forward and give of themselves, whether it is in money or in time. And I'm just not talking about the Wheels or IIT. Even when it comes to the Red Cross, the biggest lesson I learned about the Red Cross, I would like to say, and this is something that is very important as a message, if you will, charitable giving, usually is episodic, okay, or sometimes spontaneous. You see someone begging on the street, a homeless person. You open your wallet and give them $1 or whatever, and you think, and you feel conscious, you feel good that you've given something, but it doesn't solve the problem. Okay, so when there was an earthquake in Haiti or when there is Katrina, we couldn't stop people giving us. People are giving money by the droves, millions of dollars. In just one call, I remember, through some $10 per telephone call or text message, we raised something like $26 million or something. Okay, but when there is no earthquake, when there is no Katrina, when there are no natural disasters, we can go begging to people, and people don't think of giving to the Red Cross necessarily. Okay, but if you take the individual fires in communities, if you take the minor accidents or major accidents that happen, there is almost one Haiti every day in our neighborhood, almost, in terms of people who are affected by it. But nobody thinks of giving money in charity, for those kinds of causes, when you don't read about it in the press and media. Okay, so what I'm saying is that, look, I think that people need to be educated in a sense on the societal needs. So every community has some challenges and problems. The Red Cross is not the only one. There are others. And people are very generous. And when they become cognizant of what's going on, people give.
You have to turn it into a story that galvanizes action, if I'm hearing you correctly, right?
Right. So it doesn't have to be just money. It is time and talent. So it's something that I think the universities also should sort of inculcate in the students. And that's where the curriculum that I suggested, where the city and the university and, it makes them responsible, understand the civic duties that they have and commitments that they have. So I would encourage, that kind of it's a slow system. It doesn't happen overnight.
So we're getting near the end, and we need to be respectful of your time. You've been great. Our last question, as you've got to know us a little bit and understanding what the Urban Complex podcast is all about, is there anyone that you think is an absolute must-have guest that we need to find and expand the network, tell their story?
Well, I think there are a couple of people that come to mind. There's one person on our board, a fellow by the name of Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. He's also a graduate of IIT. He was India's ambassador to Chile and Argentina and in Cambodia and other places. And he just recently published a book called Beyond COVID, Beyond COVID-19, Transforming the Future of Healthcare. Okay. And it's co-authored by another fellow by the name of Dr. Joseph Chalil, who's in Miami or in Florida. And he's a doctor, as I say, a money doctor, an MD. So the two of them have co-authored this book, Beyond COVID-19 Pandemic.
We like money doctors.
Yeah, as opposed to a PhD who's a poor, hungry doctor.
we have lots of those at ASU, but
that's right. So that's a good book where a lot of the principles that we talk about in Wheels has been very well encapsulated, and they talk about what needs to change in the human psyche, if you will, should we be faced with a similar pandemic. Actually people may not look at it, but this pandemic has brought technology like Moderna, bringing the vaccine out in less than a year is phenomenal. Okay, but that also sort of makes us think about the policies that we have. is it policy that takes us 5 years to get a vaccine approved, or is it technology? You know, so it's time to sort of start reflecting on those kinds of issues. And they are excellent speakers. I would recommend them, but there are many others. Our chairman, Rajat Gupta, has had a interesting kind of a journey himself. He was the first Indian to become the leader of a major organization like McKinsey. And then, as you know, unfortunately, he was caught in this insider trading thing. He's written a book called Mind Without Fear. Excellent book, life's lessons learned, if you will.
So, sounds a little bit like US's Michael Milken, bounces back just fine.
Yeah, well,
we'd be honored, I'll tell you what. These sound like amazing guests, and we'd be honored if you could make it. But again,
I'll be happy to ask them if they would participate. So,
well, we're also honored. I owe Rajiv a huge thanks to having you here, and on behalf of Dom and I and the Urban Complex, we're just so thankful to hear these stories. And Suresh Shenoy, President of Wheels Global, thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you very much. I think it's a privilege and pleasure to be with both Dom and you. Chris, thank you very much, and wish you good luck. And don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call us if we can be of any help.
Likewise.
You got it. Thanks so much.
Oh, wow. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Anything jump to mind that you want to call out for the guests, for our audience?
Whew, it was a lot to ingest, but it was just incredible to hear his story of not only success, in his early professional career and really driving forward in the tech industry, but then turning that success and really having that, public servant mindset, that civic duty mindset, and really now trying to tackle the pressing urban, social, rural challenges that are facing not only his home country in India, but now here in America. I thought it was incredible. I think there were going to be a lot of good lessons to be learned from a lot of the, city managers, CIOs, public servants that are listening to this podcast, especially around this idea of engaging the ecosystem to help you solve the challenges that you're facing. In my work, I get to talk to a lot of these city managers and other city leaders, and the number one issue they have is really expressing the challenges that they're facing, right? Sometimes we like to keep those challenges very close to our chest, but that makes it extremely difficult to solve those challenges because we don't have all the solutions, we don't have all the knowledge, we don't have all the resources. So I love this concept around having, partnering with the local academic institution and putting your challenges through a potential curriculum and actually having the students spend the time to develop the creative solutions that can then be tested or piloted with the communities. And what I think is incredible, and this is kind of an egg that I've been trying to crack for quite some time, is engaging the philanthropic, community foundations, right? Because for the longest time, for the longest time, these two institutions, the local governments and the philanthropic organizations, they're often trying to solve the same challenge.
But they don't speak the same language. Someone has to bring them forward. And did you hear? It wasn't just the philanthropy. He also said people can make money at the same time too, technically. And if you align the citizen first and deeply think about the problem and narrow in, you can bring those groups together and they can make some money while they're doing it, or not. Like you can have it come from a nonprofit. There's many willing. So I thought he was spot on.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a new model in the area of smart cities where, the city has the challenges, they have the struggles, right? The community foundations, the philanthropic organizations, what they can do and really do good is help seed fund early ideas that might be coming out of the university to solve those challenges, right? And then allow those entrepreneurs, those students to develop a business model that's going to enable it to go to scale, right? We're not asking the philanthropic organizations to scale the technology.
But what he said, that whole, there's a Haiti in our backyard every day.
Totally.
Like, it's true. Like what ASU has done with Maryvale, we need to find a way to bring the story to the forefront because people want to get involved. Totally. And whether we crowdsource it or whether, say, some city or the ACA partners with some philanthropic donor or some person that wants to kind of galvanize it and profit, like it doesn't matter as long as we're solving the challenges. So I thought that was great.
Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, locally, here's what I'd love to see is, say, City of Phoenix hosts an innovation challenge around homelessness, right? We open it up to any college student within the greater Phoenix metro area. right? The ACF, the Arizona Community Foundation, seeds fund any pilots that come out of that, right? Hopefully those pilots are successful. It solves a challenge. It creates a business. That business then goes on to scale that solution across the entire country, right? But the ACF, the Community Foundation, helped seed fund the pilot proves successful. There's a business, there's jobs, there's economic development, right? And now we're solving homelessness across the country. So I think there's an interesting model here to play.
Cool. Well, that's a wrap. This is the Urban Complex. You find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Don't forget, hit us up on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. Let us know of future podcast guests. Let us know what you think about the podcast. Ask questions. Literally, our guests want to hear from you. They want to see what you think. So follow us, exchange with us, bring us ideas. And thanks from Dom and Chris.
Yeah, see you next time.